Bonjour tout le monde, c'est Nadia Benjedou, je suis vice-président de la partie stratégie de la e-business suite. Ça fait des années que je suis chez Oracle, j'ai déjà présenté à cette communauté pas mal de fois, avec Sabine, avec l'AUFO en général. Aujourd'hui, c'est pas moi qui va présenter, par contre, c'est plutôt mon collègue Santiago qui est notre product manager de la partie plusieurs parties d'ailleurs. Aujourd'hui, il va présenter la partie migration et de la customisation, tout ce qui est spécifique autour de la e-business suite, en particulier la version 12.2, parce que c'est quand même quelque chose de particulier pour la 12.2, comme on a introduit le online patching qui nous a demandé d'ajuster notre méthode de customisation et comment on gère la migration de la e-business suite 12.1.3 vers la 12.2 en gardant la migration et la customisation de la e-business suite du spécifique qui vient du 12.1.2 en particulier. Il y a des nouvelles normes, des nouveaux standards qu'on a ajoutés pour la 12.2 spécifiquement pour le online patching. Donc, Santiago, en plus, il est notre product manager d'une partie qui est Oracle Cloud, tout ce qui est partie Cloud Manager autour de la e-business suite pour faire du lift and shift, pour faire les provisioning et tout ça. Mais aujourd'hui, c'est pas ce sujet. Le sujet plutôt d'aujourd'hui, c'est gérer les customisations de la e-business suite de la 12.2. Ben, je te laisse, avant de laisser Santiago, vous pouvez poser des questions dans la QA box qui est en bas de votre écran et je vais faire tout mon possible de les répondre au fur et à mesure. Comme ça, on économise un peu de temps de Santiago. Les questions que je n'arrive pas à répondre moi-même, je les laisse pour la fin pour Santiago qui, comme ça, on a l'enregistrement de Santiago complet et sans perturbation. Donc, on garde les questions que je n'arrive pas à répondre à la fin. Et sinon, je pense que Sabine et AUFO en général vont enregistrer. Ils ont déjà commencé à enregistrer et je pense que la présentation et la vidéo, le recording vont être disponibles à tous les gens qui sont enregistrés à cet événement. C'est bien ça, Sabine?
Oui, tout à fait.
D'accord. Ben, je laisse Santiago. S'il te plaît, Santiago, please go ahead.
Sure thing. Thank you for that introduction, Nadia. Again, my name is Santiago Bastidas. I'm a product manager in the e-business suite development team. And today we're going to be talking about migrating and managing customizations for Oracle e-business suite release 12.2. I'm going to try to do justice to the material. I have a lot of material to cover, but at the same time, I want to make sure that you understand what I'm covering. And if you have any questions, or if you want me to make a pause and repeat something, please just let us know in the Q&A. Now, regarding customizations, the agenda for today is I'm going to be comparing how you would, first of all, deploy customizations in Business Suite 12.1 versus 12.2, where you would actually deploy or copy your files and run your files from in both releases so that you get a clear picture of how you would end up putting your customizations in place, replacing them, evolving them depending on the needs of your business. Then I will cover the 12.2 architecture changes that we made in order to support online patching. So a lot of the preparation has to do with online patching. For that reason, I'm planning to have a very high level overview of online patching and what are the premises behind it. Why did we actually make the changes that we did in order to support and to implement online patching? Then we're going to talk a little bit about the preparation. So how do you prepare your customizations for the upgrade? And what are the tools that we have available for you to help you identify some minor changes that might need to be done to your customizations in order to prepare them for the upgrade? We'll go through the upgrade process at a very high level, again, an overview of the upgrade and what's going to be the impact of your customizations as we go along with the upgrade. Finally, we'll talk about how do you manage your customizations once you get to 12.2, and we'll review some key takeaways from the presentation at the end. Now, let's jump into the customizations in eBusiness Suite 12.1 versus 12.2. First of all, customizations can be implemented in several technologies, and they can be installed or deployed in the middle tier, as well as in the database. When you deploy customizations in the database, you might deploy those customizations in eBusiness Suite schemas or in your own schemas. And your packages or your customizations themselves could, within the database could end up or have dependencies on eBusiness Suite code. It's important to understand that dependency because that is going to be one of the drivers for you to start registering your schemas with the applications so that we can manage those customizations more properly or more appropriately once you get to eBusiness Suite 12.2. So just keep that in mind, that you could have dependencies on eBusiness Suite code. Now, this is a high-level overview of the architecture of eBusiness Suite. As you know, we have a tech stack that is composed of the web tier, OC4J, and Oracle Developer 10G that runs in the application tier. And when you install eBusiness Suite, you're going to create multiple directories, but the most important directories that are from a customization standpoint are the Apple top and the common top. Usually in Apple top, you would define your custom tops and you would deploy your custom code, and it would be deployed or installed along with the application code. The same idea with the common top. You might have some customizations that would be deployed in your specific directories in the common top. The kinds of technologies that we use in both cases are for common top, everything that has to do with OA framework and Java is going to be installed in the common top, while anything else related to forms, reports, SQL and PL SQL scripts could be deployed in the Apple top in the application tier. On the other side, on the database side, you're going to see that we have application schemas, and you might have your custom schemas. In the application schemas, you might be able to deploy some of your customizations in some of the application schemas, more commonly in the apps schema, the schema that owns most of the PL SQL code that supports the eBusiness Suite application. And on the custom schemas, you usually have your own PL SQL code, as well as maybe some Java on the database, and of course, your own tables and indexes that you might want to deploy. And that's kind of how you would deploy your customizations in eBusiness Suite 12.1. This is kind of a high-level picture for it, but keep in mind that this is just for reference purposes. Now, when you think about eBusiness Suite 12.2, one of the biggest features or the features for 12.2 that make it such a big jump in technology was online patching. And for this reason, we actually jumped one release from 12.1 to 12.2 because there was a big technical uptake from our side, and we wanted to make sure that we communicate that to the field. Now, let's just recap or review online patching at a very high level. As you can imagine, you have your eBusiness Suite, in this case 12.2.9, and you have your users, your end users that are connected to this copy of your code and the data that is going to be eBusiness Suite 12.2.9. That's going to be considered the production code. Now, at the high level, the philosophy behind online patching is that you create a copy of all the code. So all the code that is currently running, you create a copy of that code. And this copy includes all your customizations. And the idea is that when you apply patches, you apply those patches to the copy while the system is still running, up and running, and while your end users are still connected to the system. Any concurrent programs, they are still running, you have your end users connected, and they are adding transactions, querying information. Everything is fully functional while we actually create this copy of the system and we start applying patches to that copy. In this case, one of the patches could be the 12.10 release, and maybe you want to make some changes in your customizations to update some functionality that works better with 12.10, or because your business has changed and your customizations need to be adapted. So all those changes could be deployed to this copy while the system is still operational. Now, the idea is that at the end of this patching cycle that we call, what you would do is a cutover. You basically just swap your users from the production code into this new copy of production that has the latest code running. That's how we actually manage and how we actually run online patching and how the feature was implemented. Now, of course, the devil is in the details. One thing that I want to highlight here is that we copy the code. We don't copy the data. Only the code is copied. Now, let's start diving into the two tiers that we have in eBusiness Suite, the application tier as well as the database tier. From an application tier perspective, you are going to have two complete copies of your file system. So you're going to have two installations of Web Listener, WebLogic, Developer 10G, as well as all the eBusiness Suite code. Complete copies of file system 1 and file system 2 are supposed to be identical, and online patching will take care of keeping both copies in sync. Now, from a database perspective, we have a single database. This single database, the beauty is that in the latest release, latest 11G release, the database group introduced a feature called edition-based redefinition. And this feature allows you to efficiently store multiple copies of the application definition in the same database. You can imagine that you can have multiple PL SQL packages, two different versions of the PL SQL packages working independently. And it provides, this edition-based redefinition, it provides an isolation mechanism that is called the edition. And the client code, when it connects to the database, it chooses the edition that you want to connect. So when you connect to the database, underneath the covers, we're going to have a specific default edition that will be chosen for you. And all the PL SQL packages and all the code and all the versions that are part of that edition will be visible to one edition. And when the patching tools connect to the database, they will connect to a different edition that has copies of all the production code, and it will make changes to those copies in the isolation of the edition. So the production edition will not be affected by the changes that you make to the patch edition in that case. The names that we have chosen for them is the production code. It's going to be called the run edition, and the code that is being updated by the patching tools will be called the patch edition, and they will work independently of each other, and you will be making all the changes to the patch edition when you patch your code. So that's how online patching works at a high level. Now, customizations, in order to be patched online, they have to comply with online patching. So for this reason, we have come up with something called development standards, and also some patching procedures so that you can perform changes to your customizations in this isolation that I was mentioning before, the isolation of the edition. And in the case of the application tier, they exist in both file systems. So we have the dual file systems on the middle tiers. And in the case that you have on the database side, you might have some custom schemas that have dependencies on eBusiness Suite objects. And those dependencies, those schemas have to be editions enabled. So editions enabled, that means that editioning is enabled by a schema. So when you have your database, within your database, you have the apps schema, you might have your own XX schema. In order for your code to be compliant, those schemas have to be editioned. Now, how do we do that? How do we addition those schemas? That is basically the things that we're going to cover as part of this seminar. Just explaining you how are the patching tools going to take care of preparing your customizations during the upgrade in order for them to be ready once you land in 12.2. Now, if we have a look at the same picture that we had for 12.1.3, but in 12.2, in this case, we're going to have in the application here 2 complete copies of the file system, including all the tech stack and the application code. Your code is going to live along the application code, so the code provided by Oracle. So you're gonna have your code there along with it. And the patching tools will take care of synchronizing the 2 file systems with your code as well as the application code. Now, on the database side, we're going to have a single database, but this single database is going to have something brand new that I just introduced here, which is a data model logical view. This data model logical view is going to be between the application code, your custom code, and the application data model. So any kind of access to the data model, any kind of access to the tables that make up the application will have to go through this data model logical view. Don't worry, I'm going to show you in this presentation how is this data model logical view is built and how is maintained as well. If you have your custom schemas and your custom schemas, you're planning to manage them using online patching as well, then we will build this data model logical view automatically for you, and your custom code should go through this logical view as well. So that's how you want to end up once you get to 12.2. This is going to be the picture that you'll have to keep in mind. So that's basically the difference between customizations in 12.1 versus customizations in 12.2. We're going to have dual file system again on the application tier. The database is going to use this new feature, the edition-based redefinition feature. And then your schemas within the database will need to be editions enabled, and all the schemas that make up the application will be editions enabled automatically at some point in the upgrade to 12.2. And I'm going to cover that in a little while. Now, let's dive into the 12.2 architecture changes to support online patching. First thing is, of course, we have a dependency on the database. So the database, in order for you to upgrade to 12.2, your database has to be in 11GR2. So that is 11.204 and or 12.102 is 11GR1 or 19Z. Any of those database is going to be compatible with 12.2. The key feature in those database versions is edition-based redefinition. And let me throw you a new concept there. And now you need to understand which objects are editioned and which objects are not editioned. In other words, which objects within the database are going to be managed automatically. And what I mean managed automatically is the versioning is managed automatically for you, and which objects in the database the versioning will not be managed automatically for you, but eBusiness Suite has implemented some schemes. We have implemented some functionality to help you manage the versioning of those objects. We're gonna have a look at that in a little while, but just keep in mind that we're gonna talk about editioned objects versus non-editioned objects in a little while. From an application tier perspective, you're gonna have the dual file system, the 2 complete copies that I talked about for deploying the files that will go in the middle tier. And there is going to be a new non-edition file system that is called FSME. And this file system will be used for storing things that we don't consider code. Things like logs, concurrent manager out, things like SSL certificates. Those things are considered data in the application tier, and they're going to live independently in this non-edition file system that will not participate in this dual file system that we're talking about. There is going to be a new patching tool as well. So forget about AD Patch. AD Patch is no longer the tool that you're going to use for patching eBusiness Suite. From the point that you move to 12.2, ADOP is going to be your patching tool. And if you want to continue developing customizations and deploying them properly, you're going to have a new set of procedures for developing those customizations and for deploying them in eBusiness Suite 12.2. And this node, the node in this slide, is going to become your key piece of documentation that will tell you how to develop and how to deploy those customizations in 12.2. Now, let's talk about edition database objects. So remember that I was talking about the code objects that you have in your database. You might have some PL SQL packages, some views, some triggers, all those things that are considered code. Those things are managed automatically by the database when you create a new edition. So you say, I want to create a new edition of my code, and then the database automatically creates copies of all your code that resides in edition the schemas. So all that code is going to be copied automatically for you. And then when you connect using the patching tools, you'll be operating against these PL SQL packages, editioning views, triggers, and all that. You can modify them. You can compile them in the isolation of the patch edition, and without disturbing the original copy of those objects that is still in use by your application. So those are edition objects, objects that are managed automatically for you. Now, there are other objects that are non-edition. Those are not copied. And those are considered things that are considered storage. So storage objects such as tables, indexes, materialized views, and sequences that store data, they are non-edition objects. So what we did as part of our development project is that we use some advanced features in EBR so that we can manage patching these objects as well. So you can actually patch a table, but you're going to have to use a different strategy for updating the tables. And you can recreate indexes that take advantage of the new shapes of your tables. And the same idea with materialized views, you'll get to manage the materialized views and sequences independently without having to rely on this automatic versioning from the database. Now, how do you manage these non-edition objects? So first of all, remember that I told you that once you get to 12.2, you're going to have a logical view of the data model. That means that all your tables, you will not access your tables directly. You will always go through a logical view of your data model. And this logical view will take care of projecting the right view of the data model for the edition that you're connected to. That logical view of the data model is implemented in something that we call editioning views. These editioning views will take care of projecting the right view of the data model to the right edition. The second thing is that we will perform upgrades. So the transactional data, the data that is stored in these tables that are part of our data model can be upgraded as well. But we are going to use a different technique for upgrading that data. The technique is going to be used, is called cross-edition triggers. And the new transactions entered into the system are going to be upgraded in place while the system is being patched. You are going to be able to actually upgrade the data in place. You're going to see, I'm going to show you an example on how that works. I know that it's a lot of new concepts, but cross-edition triggers, you will see that they are really simple to understand in the example that I'm going to present. Finally, when I said we don't copy the data, kind of lie a little bit, because we actually copy some data, and that is the seed data. Data that is used for driving, let's say, the UI of eBusiness Suite in a framework, or data that is used for specifying different seeded values that are used within the transactions, statuses and names for different statuses for the transactions, things that we consider and that help us drive the functionality of the application that is provided by Oracle is considered seed data. And for that, we have implemented something called edition data storage. So edition data storage is a new concept that was introduced by and developed by eBusiness Suite Development. And it allows you to manage multiple copies of the data that is used for driving the application. So how do we actually manage this? Let's have a look at an eBusiness Suite, let's say, environment. This eBusiness Suite environment is running, and we have the code that runs the application is going to be in the run edition. And as you can see, we have some PL SQL packages represented here, and they're going to be happily living in this edition. Now, when you begin a patching cycle, you create a new edition, and that new edition is going to be called the patch edition. And as you can see here, we have copied all the objects, or the database copies all the PL SQL objects automatically for you, and it will put them here in the patch edition. Now, this copy is very fast because it's really not copying the object. It's actually creating some point references to those objects, but you don't really need to understand the mechanics underneath it. What you need to worry about is that we will take care of creating all those copies for you, and the copy is really fast. So it's not something that is going to take a while to copy the objects. Now, once you have those objects and you have a new patch, the patch is going to contain probably some code changes. So we're probably going to replace some PL SQL packages with a new version, but they will also include some data model changes. As you can see here, the tables in this case are not copied. We have a single copy for them. So how do we implement the data model changes? Well, any existing column is never changed. What we do is we implement any change as a new column. So if you want to modify, let's say, the type of one of the columns in a table, what you leave that table alone, and what you create is a new column. And this new column is going to be used from that point forward to maintain the data of that specific column. And the other, the old column is going to be discarded. So that's how we implement data model changes in 12.2. Let's have a look at this. So PL SQL changes very easily. They just go into the patch edition, and they are replacing the old version of the code. Now, for data model changes, what we do is we implement or add a new column because we want to change an old column with a new behavior, with a new data type, something that the developer identified that needs to be done, and that's going to be implemented in this new column. And the running application does not see the new column. They only see the columns that were visible and available in the previous version of the previous edition, which is the run edition. This new column is only going to be available or visible to the run edition of the system. I'm sorry, to the patch edition of the system. Now, this data model now has a cover layer. It's a logical rather than a physical representation, and it's implemented using something called editioning views, and they are the ones that will take care of projecting the right view to the system. Now, editioning views are going to project different views depending on the edition that you're interacting with. So the patch edition is going to see some view of the tables, while the run edition is going to see some other view of the tables. That is why it is really important that all the code that access eBusiness Suite data model goes through this cover layer, goes through these editioning views. And I'm going to show you how we actually implemented this. The idea is that you have your code, custom code, the eBusiness Suite code, and third-party code going through a synonym. It's in the apps schema. And this is the same way that it has been working all along. So since 11i, since prior to 11i, we always had a synonym in the apps schema that was pointing to the tables that were running on their own product schema. Apple Cs, AP, AR, all have their tables, and we always had a synonym pointing to them. Now in 12.2, what we did is we introduced this new editioning view in between the synonym and the table. And this editioning view is the one that will take care of projecting the right columns to the code that is running on each one of the editions. So that's one of the things that if you take something out of this seminar, is to understand that your code, as well as the business suite code, has to access the data model or the tables via the synonym in apps. Now, what happens to the transactional data? Because transactions are going to continue to come into the system, but there is a single copy of the transactional data. We don't duplicate the data. We only duplicate the code, remember? So editioning views will project the correct logical view of the physical tables to the run and patch edition. And during patching, data updates will be propagated from the run edition to the patch edition using something called cross-edition triggers. All this sounds complex, but nothing that an example cannot help us clarify this. Let me walk you through this example. Let's say that you have a table that is a service request table, and you have 3 columns: ID, filed by, and status. And status has a data type of number. Now, status and number, it's kind of difficult to read actually for somebody that is doing the analysis. So the developer that is behind this says, well, why don't we change this column status to something that is more understandable, like a varchar 2, that has a meaning for it. So let's implement the change. So how do I implement the changes in 12.2? Well, I basically just create a new column, and this new column is going to have the change that I need. In this case, I have changed the type from number to varchar 2. Now, as part of this change, my running application will continue to see status as number. And how is that possible? Because I have a run edition view that will project the column status to the run edition, and it will project these 3 columns. In the case of the patch edition, if the patching tools are connecting to the system, they will see status, the column status, that points to this other column. So that is how we implement changes to the data model. And the changes are done in isolation. And you can imagine that at some point, this patch editioning view will become the only, or the run edition moving forward at some point when we propagate, when we promote the changes that we did as part of this patching cycle. At that point, this is going to be the only view visible to the end users as well, as soon as we promote the changes that were done in this patch edition. So this is how it is implemented. Now, run and patch editions see different projections, and the code in the run edition will treat status column as a number. It will have values like 11, 30, and 90. And the code in the patch edition will use the new 30-character status column, and it will have values such as open, info, requested, fixed, that they are easier to read. Now, of course, all the code that manages this table will need to be adapted as well. Now, how do we actually make changes while the system is still in operation? So instead of writing upgrade scripts that convert the values 30, 11, and 19 into the new values, what we have is something called cross-edition triggers that will make the changes for you. They will propagate the changes into this new column, and it will also keep the data or the transactions coming in, performing the required translation as part of the transactions when they come in. And the pre and post upgrade schemas data coexist. So the two versions of the data will coexist for a little while. Now, let me show you that. How is that going to happen? So imagine that we have this table that has already been changed. When you implement the new change, the status point one column is going to have empty values, right? So they're not going to have any values in them because we just implemented the change. So use the existing rows into the new values. So now you see we have the two views of the data. The run edition has a view that sees all this status in numbers, and the patch edition view will see all the status in a varchar real value open, info requested, and fixed. That's how the cross edition trigger works. So it will be applied for all the existing rows. Now, what happens with the new rows? Because the system is still operational, people are still inserting new service requests. So what happens is that when a new row comes in, the trigger, the cross edition trigger will fire and will perform the translation for you, and the value will be presented to the run edition and the patch edition with the right values, with the right projection of the columns. So this is how online patching actually implements changes to the data model. Now, why am I telling you this whole story? Well, because eBusiness Suite is going to take care, our team, the eBusiness Suite development team, will take care of implementing all the changes required to do these changes for the eBusiness Suite code. But for your custom model, data model, if you decide to go with full online patching standards, you will implement these changes, you will implement the cross edition triggers, and all the documentation on how to build this will be in the note that I mentioned before, how to create the cross edition triggers and how to alter the tables or modify the tables, adding these new columns that will be used moving forward by your system. So that has to do with all the changes to the data model, and you saw how we actually change the views in this case, which are considered codes that are copied. Now, what about the seed data? Seed data is data stored in the database that affects the behavior of the application and is patched by eBusiness Suite development. So we take care of deploying changes to this seed data. Important thing with the same principle of online patching applies, that patches and the patching procedure cannot allow to modify the seed data that is being used by the running application. So we need to make changes to that data in the isolation of the patch edition. So what we did is basically we create a complete copy of all the rows that make up seed data the first time that you patch seed data in your system. At that point, we create this full copy, and the run edition is going to operate in one of those two copies of the data, while the patch edition and the patching tools will operate and make changes to the seed data in the second copy. And we'll maintain these two copies switching back and forth when there is a need to patch the seed data. So two sets of rows will be permanently synced up by the patching tools when required. So that's how edition data storage is implemented. Now, we saw again the 12.2 architecture changes to support online patching. Most of them, as you can see, have to do with database objects, data model changes, PL/SQL objects that will be automatically copied. And we are going to use these advanced techniques to maintain the two copies or the two editions when there is a patching cycle, so that you can maintain your system and apply changes to your system while the system is still running and operational. Now, how do we prepare our customizations for this upgrade? Well, first of all, you need to understand that this is a project. So you have to go to your management and make sure that they understand that the customizations upgrade project is something that needs to go through. And this project we need to create a catalog of all the customizations so that we understand which customizations are deployed in the system and which customizations probably need to be adapted in order to be compliant with the standards. Then we need to analyze and implement code remediation based on some tools that I'm going to talk about here that will help you identify any kind of code violation that your customizations might have. And then you will deploy your revised customizations and you will deploy them in the current release that you're running EBS. So if you're running 12.1, the changes that will be suggested as part of this exercise will be compatible with your code, with 12.1, or maybe if you're in a prior release, they will be compatible with those releases as well. Now, the catalog is basically just understanding all the objects that need to be reviewed or revisited from a database standpoint, from a middle tier standpoint, and of course, from the technology that is used for creating them. There is a discovery and reporting for customizations feature available in the Application Management Suite. Application Management Suite is a product that is part of the Enterprise Manager plugins that delivers this functionality to create a catalog if you want to use it. There are some third-party products that also help you identify and catalog all your customizations in your system, but this is just an example of the things that you will see. But the idea is to understand what you have in your system. Now, there is a decision point to determine if you want to, how do you want to maintain your customizations once you get to 12.2? You either have minimal compliance to the standards. With minimal compliance to the standards, you'll continue to use the same operation principles that you currently have for maintaining your customizations, but your customizations will run in 12.2. But the idea is that in order for those customizations to run, you'll have to adhere to some standards. Those are the minimal standards to be met. What I would recommend, though, is to fully embrace online patching and fully comply fully to the standards for developing customizations that are online patching compatible. So if you decide to go with full compliance, you will see what are the standards that you need to comply, and I'll show you the tools that are available for you to identify that. Now, the online patching readiness reports and the online patching standards compliance reports are the two reports that will be used for determining if your code is compliant or not. All the sections in the readiness reports will be referred to the minimal compliance. So all the sections in the report that I'm going to show you will have to be completely addressed if there are any violations in these reports in order for your code to be compatible with 12.2. Now, the standards compliance reports has some sections that are applicable to minimal compliance so that your code will run, and some other sections that are related to full compliance, which means that your customizations will be able to take advantage of the online patching features completely. And this note at the bottom will talk about the readiness reports. Now, readiness reports validate edition-based redefinition compliance, and all the sections in the report refer to minimal compliance. So you have to clean and address all the violations in all the sections in this report. And this report will be applicable to the pre-12.2 upgrade. And if you fail to address the standards violations, you might end up with invalid code in 12.2 upgrade. After the upgrade is done, maybe your custom code might get invalidated. That's why it's important that you address all these violations in preparation to the upgrade. Then here are the three reports that make up the readiness reports. The first report identifies custom schemas, your schemas that have dependencies on e-business suite code. And the beauty of this is that it will generate some statements that will help you register your schema with the application so that we can take care of preparing your customizations automatically for you if you register those schemas with the application. So the upgrade process will take care of addressing most of the violations. The ADCV PMAN, the second report, identifies objects that violate the minimal compliance standards, which require manual intervention. You need to actually make modifications manually in some of your code in order to be compliant. The amount of work that needs to be done manually is very minimal. If you register the custom schemas with us, a lot of the work can be done automatically. But there are a few things that you might need to take care of and you need to fix them. The third report, the ADCV AUT, is just for information purposes only. It basically tells you which e-business suite code, core code, will be updated as part of the upgrade, but it's just for information purposes. So the one that you need to really pay attention to is the second one. And the first one to register your custom schemas. You can probably ignore the third one. Now, this is how the output of the report looks like. You'll have multiple sections. In those sections, they will tell you if what needs to be done in order to address the violation. So the section header will show up, and then all the objects that violate that standards will follow this header. And then usually the headers provide instructions on how to address the violations. In this case, either drop the object if not required, or redefine the objects to remove any dependencies, or move the objects to a registered custom EBS schema. So those are kind of the guidance that we give you in order to address the violation of those objects. As you can see here, most of these violations will be addressed if you register your custom schemas with the application, and by running the previous report, running a script for it. Now, what are the corner cases that we will not be able to address automatically as part of the upgrade if your schema is registered with us? One of them is the materialized views that have dependencies on PL/SQL packages, or the use of long and long raw. As you can see, there are very corner cases, and we hope that you don't use these advanced features. But if you use these advanced features, then you will always have some guidance as part of the report. And as soon as you finish addressing or registering most of your schemas with the application, these things will just go away. They will be cleaning up. So the exercise would be to run the report, identify the violations, and then once you identify the violations, you rerun the report, and then the sections will start to clear up. So you won't get any rows on any of them. So that is the idea of the iterative process that you'll go through. Now, let's look at the standards compliance reports. This validates standards applicable to minimal and full compliance. In this section, headers indicate the type of compliance. So you'll see minimal or full. If you want to maintain your customizations using online patching, make sure that you address all the violations that are marked minimal and full. If you don't plan to use online patching for maintaining your customizations and you want your customization only to work, you can adhere only to the minimal standards. And these standards include data model access pattern, a mouthful of a name, but I'll show you that it's really not that difficult. Some code naming standards as well, and some special object definition requirements such as VPDs and materialized views that need to be addressed based on the direction and the instructions that are provided as part of this. Now, failure to address these standard violations could result in future code invalidation, so they could be complex. So make sure that you actually address all these standards violations if you want to comply to minimal and full. Now, the data model access pattern is what we discussed before. All the business suite code and custom code must access the data model via the synonym in the apps schema. And if you have any custom code, make sure that you have a synonym in the apps schema and you point to that synonym You point to your custom data model also through the synonym. You don't do the access directly. So that would be the recommendation. All code must access the data via logical views. Now, coding naming standards. These are some more standards on how you name your objects. And just to give you an example of the things that you need to look for, it's going to be like the names of your, in this case, tables cannot have a hash at the end, this sign at the end. Why is that? Because the online patching code uses some technique to name objects dynamically, and it uses these special characters. So if you have tables that have a hash at the end, the code, the e-business suite online patching code will get confused and it will not know how to handle it. So that's why this is a standard. So don't use hashtags at the end or hash sign at the end of the name. The other standard would be, another example is the use of the pound sign or the hash sign, as one of the characters for the column name. So in this case, if you use it, again, the e-business suite online patching code will get confused because we use some algorithms to generate the code, and they will get confused if you use this standards. You violate those standards. So those are the kind of changes that we would recommend that you make. The other thing is that these standards, there is another standards compliance report. It's a Perl script that can be executed in the middle tier data against the middle tier objects, such as Java, XML, SQL, PL SQL forms and reports. And this will again report for violations to the standard that e-business suite code and custom code in the application tier cannot access the tables directly. They have to always go through the synonyms in apps. So this applies to objects within the database, as well as objects that are, or files that are in the application tier code. And we have this Perl script that will help those kind of objects. This is how the compliance reports looks like. As you can see, there is this qualification that says if this section is applicable to full or minimal compliance. We set a priority for them, and we also tell you how to address the violation. And then once you do all these changes to your code, once you clean up your violations, you can redeploy the code and rerun the report, and the report will start to get cleared up. The idea at the end is that the report has no objects in them, no rows on each of the sections. You should only see the section titles at the end of your exercise. Again, violations to their standards can be very easily fixed. As you can see, it's mostly the naming standards, or if you don't, you're fully qualifying the access to the tables in your code, you just need to remove the fully qualification or qualify access to the table via the apps schema. So that would be changes. They are not complex, but they could be time consuming because you might have a lot of objects. That's the only thing that I would say. The beauty of this report is that you can continue to use this report even once you get to 12.2, so that you continually check that all the new code that you developed is compliant with online patching. So that's the idea and the beauty of this second report, the standards compliance report. Now, as soon as you finish addressing all your code violations, and you can actually deploy this revised code in the pre-12.2 release. So you can deploy this in 12.1 or 11i or 12.0 if you are running 12.0, and the code is going to be compatible. So the changes are not major. They are not going to introduce any functional change to your system. The changes are minimal, as you noticed. And this is what you are going to end up with as soon as you have finished the exercise. All your custom code will be minimally or fully online patching compliant. At this point, you're ready for the upgrade to 12.2. So in the preparing customizations, we saw that we have some tools available for you to help you check for the violations to the standards. We also saw that we have two different kinds of compliance. One is full compliance, the other is minimally compliant. I would recommend again to go with full compliance so that you can patch your system online, and that any kind of a new development that you do in 12.2 can also be checked by the standards compliance report. So that's basically what we reviewed. Now let's move on to the upgrade impact to customizations. This is basically the technical upgrade process. You'll go through all these 7 steps, and this is basically a high-level view of all the things that you need to do as part of the upgrade. You will upgrade a database to a database that is compliant with 12.2. You will lay down the 12.2 file system, so you'll install the middle tiers. You will upgrade to 12.2.0. Then you'll enable online patching. Then you will upgrade to 12.2.10 at this point, I would recommend. Then you will deploy your customizations and external integrations. And finally, you will configure your system for production capacity. 3 of these steps are important from a customization standpoint. The laying down of the file system so that you understand what you're deploying. The enabling of online patching, because it will, at this point, you will perform some changes that will automatically address some violations. And so that's going to be interesting. And then the deployment of customizations and external integrations. Those are the 3 steps that are important. Why it's important, the laydown of the file system, is because when you install the file system, the 12.2.0 file system, you will have 2 complete copies of the e-business suite code as well as the tech stack, but you won't have any of your customizations deployed in the application tier. It will be blank. We don't copy your customizations from the previous release. You will have to deploy this manually in a subsequent step. The other step that is important is the online patch enablement process. And again, this would be the last opportunity that you have to deploy any remediated database code that was identified and developed in the preparation project. So make sure that you register any custom schemas, you run the readiness reports and database compliance reports right before you run the enablement, so that you know that your customizations are ready for the upgrade. And this process is very database centric. It prepares all the database code for editioning, and it will address code violations for e-business suite code as well as customizations. So that's why it's important that you register your customizations schemas with us. It enables editioning, and it creates a logical view of the data model. This is basically a graphical depiction of what happens. So initially you have the apps schema with all the code, you have your custom schemas and the EBS custom schemas as well. So the enablement, the first thing that it does is creates a new schema called apps NE, and it moves some user-defined types there. The second thing that it does, it will enable editioning in all the custom schemas, register with EBS schemas, as well as, of course, the apps schema. And then on all the custom and EBS schemas, it will create this new layer, the editioning view, logical view, for you automatically in the custom schemas as well as the EBS schemas. So that's what happens as part of the online patch enablement. If you don't register your custom schema with us, we won't be able to build this editioning view, this logical view, and we won't be able to editions enable your custom schema. That's why it's important that you perform all the steps in preparation for this. Now, let's talk about the deployment customizations and integrations. Here, you're going to follow this new set of rules to define and develop customizations moving forward. You'll register the custom tops with AD Splice. This is a new step in 12.2. Any custom top from this point forward has to be moved to the Apple top, and you'll need to apply the latest AD and TXK during the upgrade. This is a couple of patches that are applicable to your system. The latest one is Delta 11. Delta 12 is about to be released. It probably was released already. And then AD and TXK Delta 8 introduce a new synchronization process that keeps the both file systems in sync by using a more modern and more fast mechanism for deploying and performing the synchronization. So that's basically it. At the end of the deploying of customizations, you will end up deploying your custom code along the application code. And then at this point, you run something called FS clone that will take care of synchronizing that custom code between the two file systems. And you'll have a system ready for 12.2 upgraded and ready for production. We have validated this project as part of the validation process. We took an Apex application that was developed on top of EBS as a customization. And all the steps that I mentioned in this presentation were tested with this application. At the end of the whole thing, the system was fully functional, and we were able to identify that the project was sound, and the instructions that we're giving you definitely make sense, and you end up with a system that is fully functional. There is a link here that you can follow if you have an Apex application to see what you do. So that's basically it. You got your system to 12.2. Now you need to think about managing your customizations in 12.2. I'd recommend that you do you use full compliance again? And if you do full compliance, you are going to see that in 12.2, you will go through a patching cycle. You will prepare your system for patching. The system will continue to be operational. In the apply phase, you will apply all the business suite patches along with your customization changes while the system is still running. Then you'll run the finalize and finally the cutover phase and cleanup. In the cutover, your change code will become the run edition, and it will be available to end users, and you will have upgraded your system using online patching. Let me show you this in a depiction. The online patching cycle is going to be on your left. We'll go through the multiple phases. You have the application here on the left-hand side and the database on the right-hand side. So the first time when you run a prepare phase for online patching, we take care of synchronizing custom and application code. At this point, both file systems should be identical after the prepare. On the database side, what we do is we create a brand new edition called the patch edition, and that's going to have custom application code and logical view, copies of all the objects. And then at this point, everything will be ready for applying patches. At the bottom, we see some eBusiness Suite patches as well as some custom patches. So we're going to apply those changes to the patch edition in the database as well as the patch file system in the application here. As soon as that is done, you'll see that you have a new code. That new code needs to be compiled in the database, and the compilation process will happen in the isolation of the edition, and the patch file system will be ready for that. During the cutover, what we do is, first of all, we change the designation of the file system. We move everything to the new code, and new processes will be started looking at the new code. On the database side, we retire the run file system. We make it part of the old edition, and then all the new code will be part of the run edition now, and the system will run using this code on both sides. So that's what you would do definitely as part of the cutover process. Cleanup is just to retire some old code, and this operation can be done while the system is fully functional and operational. So that is how you maintain with full compliance. Use the new development and deployment procedures. Again, this document is really important. If you get something out of this session, is this document for developing and deploying customizations. If you want to have minimal compliance and you don't want to use online patching for maintaining your code, this is how the process is going to look like. You will go through a patching cycle, you'll do the cutover, and you are going to have to extend the cutover by deploying your customizations directly into the run file system and the run edition of the database, defeating the purpose of online patching and extending the downtime that you take for the cutover every time that you do a patching cycle. So that's why I wouldn't recommend to go with this. I would recommend to always go for full compliance. And again, most of the important things that you keep in mind for the minimal compliance is the data model access pattern. You have to comply to that. Everything has to go through the synonym apps. And the deployment stages, again, you will deploy your code, your changes to the run edition and run file system directly. Now, what are the tools available to help you manage the customizations? From one side, we have the patch wizard that helps you register some of the code that you depend on. And this is just for flagging if there is a new patch in the future that changes this code, you will be notified because when you do patch analysis, your customizations will be, the dependencies on EBS code will be flagged here in the flag files changed section in the patch wizard. So some utility that will help you see what's the impact on your customizations. The other big tool that helps you manage customizations in 12.2, again, is the application management suite, the customization management a feature that helps you create the catalog, but at the same time, it helps you create packages or patches that look like EBS patches for your customization, so you can apply them directly into an EBS system. Now, what are the key takeaways from this whole presentation? I think the idea is to get familiar with the 12.2 architecture, the dual file system, the new EBR dependent database, decide the standards that you want to, the standards compliance level that you want to target, either minimally or full compliance, create an upgrade project for customizations ahead of the 12.2 upgrade, get familiar with the development and deploying standards that I mentioned in the note below, take advantage of online patching to deploy your customizations, and use the right tools to maintain your customizations. Application Management Suite definitely is one of them, and I hope that this presentation was as you expected. With that, I want to thank everybody for allowing me the opportunity to present this material. The material will be available to you. I think this recording is going to be available. So Sabine, again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to present to this group. And are there any questions that you may have? It's okay. I think with that, I think we probably want to close the session now. I, again, want to thank you for the opportunity to let me present in this forum.